In some forgotten corner of Judea, among stone alleys and the smell of baked bread escaping from houses at dawn, Agabus was born. No one celebrated with trumpets or wrote songs. He was just another boy from a simple family at a time when every day was a struggle to survive. But even so, there was something about him that caught people's attention. He wasn't particularly handsome or strong, nor was he different in any way. It was his gaze. One of those deep gazes, as if he were always seeing something that others couldn't see. While other children ran through the alleys playing war with sticks, Agabus used to sit quietly in a corner, watching the sky, listening to the sound of the wind in the olive trees, paying attention to the silence. There was a restlessness inside him, a constant feeling that something big, bigger than him, was about to happen. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting Bible stories and turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos. If you like the content, feel free to support our work with a financial donation by clicking on the Thanks a Lot button. You can also become a member of the channel and enjoy exclusive benefits. The years passed, and he grew up carrying this discomfort in his chest. It wasn't pain, but it wasn't peace either. It was as if an invisible hand was pushing him forward, even when he wanted to stay. As if life was always whispering in his ear, "Get ready." He didn't know what for, or when, or how. He just knew that this call was coming from a place that couldn't be ignored. Once, when he was young, he felt a tightness in his chest so strong that he almost fell. It was during a simple meeting with brothers in faith. Ordinary people gathered to pray and share bread. In the middle of the prayer, an image invaded his mind like a storm. Desperate people, dry fields, mothers with their children in their arms crying for food that didn't exist. The vision was as clear as day. He tried to ignore it, but the image returned, again and again. It was as if he had been pushed forward by force. And it was there, in that silent moment between one breath and another, that Agabus realized he could no longer pretend that it was just his imagination. Agabus stood there, his heart beating like a drum inside his chest, the image of hunger still spinning in his mind. He tried to hide it, but his eyes gave him away. One of his brothers approached him, touched him lightly on the shoulder and asked, "Are you okay, Agabus?" He just nodded, but inside, it was as if something had broken and spilled out. In the days that followed, that feeling only grew. It wasn't fear. It was like a silent call, a kind of urgency that wouldn't let up. He woke up in the middle of the night with his heart racing, feeling a strange warmth in his hands, as if they were made to hold something sacred, invisible. He felt that God was trying to talk to him, not with a voice like thunder, but with whispers that pierced his chest. That's when he began to notice small things. A bird flying too low, an old man saying something unintentionally that seemed like the answer to a question he hadn't even asked. Everything seemed to carry a hidden meaning. It was as if the world around him had started speaking another language, one that only he could understand. But he still didn't know what to do with it. If he said too much, they would call him crazy. If he stayed silent, he felt like he would explode. So he did what he could. He prayed. A lot. Sometimes kneeling, sometimes walking back and forth with his eyes on the sky. He asked for wisdom. He asked for direction. He asked for courage. And without realizing it, that quiet boy began to change. Little by little, people began to notice. He spoke little, but when he did, it was as if time stood still. His words carried weight. It wasn't knowledge from books. It was something else, something that came from within, as if the sky itself opened its mouth through him. Then, during one of these meetings, he stood up, and when he stood up, no one blinked. It was as if the air had become heavier, thicker, like when rain is about to fall. Agabus, his hands trembling slightly, looked around and said, "The Lord has shown me. There will be a famine, not a small one that will spread everywhere. Even Rome will feel it." It was like a bolt of lightning on a clear day. The place fell silent. No one knew what to say. Some frowned, others looked at each other, trying to understand if they had heard correctly. But he didn't stop there. He began to describe scenes that no one wanted to imagine: empty barns, markets without grain, mothers dividing the last piece of bread among their children. Each word seemed to fill the space like a distant drum, beating, beating, beating. It was impossible not to feel it. His words were like arrows piercing the soul. Some people were holding back tears. An older man, sitting in the back, turned white as a sheet and squeezed his wife's hand. Agabus didn't shout. He didn't give a speech. He spoke softly, firmly, as if he could already see everything happening right before his eyes. And the strangest thing was, no one thought he was lying. As harsh and heavy as the message was, no one stood up to contradict him. The images he described weren't just words, they were almost palpable. You could smell the burning wheat. You could hear the muffled cries of someone begging for food. When he finished, he didn't apologize or offer any explanations. He just sat down again, his face serious, sweating coldly. It was as if he had delivered a burden that wasn't his. The silence continued for a long time, heavy as a stone on our chests. And then someone stood up, walked to the center and said, "If this famine is really coming, what are we going to do?" That question hung in the air. What are we going to do? It wasn't just a question, it was almost a plea. It was as if suddenly everyone there had felt the weight of the prophecy, and knew deep down that they couldn't go on with their lives as if nothing had happened. The days that followed were strange. The meetings that had once been full of joy and singing now began with long silences. No one wanted to be the first to speak. Everyone looked at Agabus with a mixture of respect and fear, as if he were a mirror showing a future that no one wanted to see. It didn't take long for the news to spread. People from other villages began to arrive just to hear what he had said. Some came doubting, others with wide eyes, but they all left different. Not because he spoke beautifully. Agabus wasn't like that. It was what came with his words, a weight that couldn't be ignored. Little by little, reactions began. Some leaders tried to pretend it wasn't that serious. "God will provide," they said with a forced smile, trying to remain calm. But inside, they knew it wasn't just a figure of speech. Others, more practical, began to gather supplies, organize offerings, and think about how to help their brothers and sisters in poorer regions. It was at this point that Agabus's role began to change. From a frightening prophet, he became a point of reference. He didn't give orders or lead with shouts, but everything that happened somehow passed through him. It was as if that vision had placed him in a place where no one else could stand. And even without meaning to, he was drawn to the center of it all. The famine did not arrive with fanfare. It did not come with thunder or disasters all at once. It came slowly, like a dry wind that strips the green from things without making a sound. First, wheat began to disappear from the markets. Then olive oil became too expensive. Families began to divide their bread into smaller and smaller slices until a single piece had to last the whole day. What Agabus had seen began to come true before everyone's eyes. There was no longer any room for doubt. Reality was knocking at the door, and there was no escape. One by one, the cities of the Roman Empire began to feel the weight of scarcity. Antioch, one of the richest, became an example of what was to come. Even the most skeptical now spoke Agabus's name with seriousness, almost with reverence. In Jerusalem, the situation was even more difficult. Many Christians were unemployed, marginalized, living on donations and the goodwill of their brothers. The city streets, once filled with voices and footsteps, began to echo with silence and the groans of those crying for food. But the most surprising thing was what this crisis did to people's hearts. Where despair was expected, generosity sprang forth. Churches that barely knew each other began to unite. Some sent coins, others bags of wheat, others clothes and even utensils. The network of faith spread like a quilt made by invisible hands, and Agabus, he remained steadfast, helping to organize, counseling, praying with his brothers and sisters. He did not seek leadership, but it found him. His presence brought direction, like a compass in the middle of a storm. And it was on this journey, between prayers and secret meetings, that he learned of something even more serious coming from heaven. Something that involved a man named Paul. In the midst of all this, while the city struggled with hunger and the brothers did the impossible to help one another, Agabus did not stop. He walked from house to house, carrying sacks of flour on his back, distributing food, bringing words of encouragement like someone distributing blankets in a relentless winter. He had no luxury, no stage, only dust on his feet and truth in his mouth. Even those who did not understand much about faith knew, where Agabus went, something changed. Children ran to see him pass by. Mothers waved from their doors, and the elderly whispered quietly as if they were in the presence of someone who could see beyond. And he could see. It was as if he had a map drawn by God inside his head, guiding his every step. But what few knew was that behind that calm exterior, there was a weight, a burden that only he carried. Sometimes he would walk away from the group, sit on a rock, look up at the sky, and remain silent for hours. It was during these moments that he received more than food. He received visions, messages, images that came like flashes of lightning, fast, sharp, striking. And in one of these visions, he did not see dry fields or hungry children. He saw a man. It was Paul, the same man many had heard preach, who had traveled halfway around the world spreading the gospel. But what Agabus saw was not a sermon. It was imprisonment, handcuffs, soldiers, an angry crowd. Paul's name being shouted amid shoving and stones, and then silence. At the time, Agabus didn't understand everything, but he knew that this wasn't just any image. It was a warning. It was a sign that something very big was about to happen, something that didn't just concern Paul, but the whole path that faith was following. And he knew that this time he would have to speak again, loudly, in front of everyone. The hall was full. It was one of those gatherings where brothers came from far away, some traveling for days just to hear a word, share a meal, renew their strength. Agabus arrived silently, as he always did. But that day, something about him was different. His eyes were deeper, his gait firmer. He was carrying something inside him, and everyone noticed. In the middle of the meeting, when the singing stopped and the conversation turned to prayer, Agabus stood up. He took a belt that belonged to Paul, a simple piece of leather, old and worn by time. He held the object in his hands and with a firm voice began to speak. The Holy Spirit says, "This is how the owner of this belt will be bound in Jerusalem. He will be handed over to the Gentiles." A chill ran through the room. Some looked at Paul, others covered their mouths with their hands. This was not just a warning, it was a foreshadowing. The way Agabus tied his own hands with the belt, the way he staged his arrest in front of everyone, made it all seem more real. It was not just a prophecy, it was a living scene, before the eyes of those who did not want to believe. Paul watched without blinking. There was no panic on his face, but a hard, heavy silence. He understood immediately. What Agabus saw was true. It did not come from the mind of a man, but from heaven. And that message brought a destiny that no one there would dare to wish for. The meeting turned into weeping. Many tried to convince Paul not to go. They begged and pleaded. "Stay here. Wait a little longer." But Paul's gaze was already far away, like someone who accepts the price of the call. Agabus said nothing more after that. He put the belt back in his hands, looked one last time at his brother, and walked away in silence. He knew that what was coming would not be easy. But still, it was only the beginning of what God had to show. After that day, tension seemed to linger between the lines of every conversation. No one spoke loudly, no one smiled for long. The image of Agabus with his hands tied by his belt still lingered in everyone's minds like a stubborn shadow. one that even the strongest sun cannot erase. Some began to question in low voices. Was it really God who spoke? Others wanted to believe that Agabus was just tired, or perhaps had misinterpreted. After all, Paul was one of the greatest names among them. How could they accept that he of all people would be arrested? It didn't make sense. It was as if a warrior had been sent away before the final battle. But Agabus's gaze left no room for doubt. He wasn't trying to convince anyone. He didn't need to. It was the kind of truth that doesn't need to be shouted to hurt. He stood firm, like someone carrying a flame that cannot be extinguished, even if it burns his hands. And Paul did not back down. Despite all the attempts, despite the emotional pleas, he remained determined. "I'm ready," he said, "not only to be arrested, but even to die, if necessary." Was it courage or madness? Perhaps both. But it was true. The same faith that drove Paul forward was what sustained Agabus in silence. Meanwhile, the city was in turmoil. Rumors ran through the alleys. Some said that the Romans already knew of Paul's arrival. Others said that an ambush was being planned near the temple. It was like a powder keg waiting for a spark. And everyone knew that spark was about to fall. Agabus withdrew for a few days. He was seen on the hill, alone, praying as if talking to heaven face to face. And it was there, amid the wind and stones, that he saw another scene. A chain, a ship, and Paul, looking at the horizon with eyes full of faith. Paul walked through the streets of Jerusalem with a mixture of calm and tension. He knew what awaited him, but there was no turning back. The voices crying out for him to avoid the city, the warnings of his friends, nothing seemed to touch his heart. He carried a greater certainty, a strength that did not come from men, but from something invisible, unshakable. There was a moment when he thought about giving up, boarding a ship to take him far away, fleeing the danger that was approaching. The idea seemed tempting, the calm sea, the distance, the chance to continue his work without threats. But it was as if a strong wind was blowing against him, pushing him forward toward the inevitable confrontation. Gradually, that thought gave way to a clear decision. He had to face whatever came his way. Not out of empty bravery, but because he believed that the path laid out for him could not be interrupted. It was a surrender, an acceptance of what they called destiny. But for Paul, it was more than that. It was a mission. In the midst of this decision, Agabus's warning rang in his mind, the invisible chains that bound him even before the shackles. His hands were tied, and the belt symbolized a prison that would not be easy to endure. But Paul was not alone. Even knowing the risk, there were people around him who supported him, who prayed for him, and who, despite their fear, encouraged him to continue. It was a small but steadfast group, and each one carried hope in their eyes, even when the path seemed dark. So, with steady steps and a resolute heart, Paul moved toward what he knew was the beginning of a new chapter. But neither he nor anyone else there could imagine what was really to come. Paul's arrest happened as Agabus had predicted, but no one was really prepared for the weight of that moment. The metallic sound of chains echoed through the stone corridors, a sound that seemed to scream in the silence of the dungeons. It was the clinking of reality, of the mission that was becoming even heavier and more real. As Paul was led away, the brothers watched in silence, knowing that the future was now drawn in crooked and uncertain lines. Agabus's words were no longer just distant prophecies. They were life itself unfolding before their eyes. He remained there, steadfast, looking toward the horizon, knowing that the journey was not yet over. But prison was not the end for Paul, nor for what he represented. The letters he wrote from there, the words that came out of the darkness of the cells, spread throughout the world. They were seeds sown in fertile soil, changing hearts and minds far beyond what anyone could have imagined. And Agabus, he remained as the one who saw before, who announced before, who lived before. An ordinary man touched by the call, capable of carrying the weight of truth even when it is too difficult for others. Agabus's story does not end with the clinking of chains or the silence of prisons. It lives on in every gesture of courage, in every voice that rises against fear, in every hand extended to help others. And it is in this movement, in this dance between vision and action, between warning and surrender, that we find the true meaning of what it means to hear and respond to a call. And so, as the pages of history are still being written, the next chapter waits to be revealed. After all that happened, it is clear that Agabus's life was much more than mere prophecies. He was someone who accepted a burden that many would have run from, someone who, even without wanting the spotlight, put himself on the front lines of the impossible. His courage was not in grand gestures or empty words, but in that steadfast silence, in that willingness to be the voice of what the heart hesitated to face. Agabus teaches us that hearing a call is not just listening to beautiful words. It is understanding that sometimes what comes with it is hard, uncomfortable, and yet still needs to be said. That prophecy, warning, mission is not to be hidden or denied, even if it causes fear, doubt, or even rejection. It is to be carried with humility and truth, as he did. Furthermore, his story shows that being called does not mean being alone. Even in the face of the greatest storms, such as the famine that shook the Roman world, or Paul's imminent imprisonment, there was an invisible network of support, faith, and action. Agabus was part of a larger movement, a reminder that when one rises, many are touched and transformed. Finally, Agabus's life challenges us to look beyond what is easy and comfortable. His courage lay in looking into the eyes of the future, even when it brought hardship, and saying, "I will speak, I will act." Because in the end, what truly transforms us is not just our words, but what we do with them. And it is in this story of voice, courage, and dedication that we find inspiration for our own callings, whatever they may be, knowing that the path may be difficult, but it is worth taking. And so, like Agabus, we are invited to continue the journey, attentive to what time will reveal. If you enjoyed Agabus's story and want to continue following other stories of faith and overcoming adversity, be sure to like this video and share it with your loved ones. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content. Together, we will explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.